Do you love Euro games? Great. This game in front of me might be for you. There's a bunch of wooden discs, you have to be efficient with your actions, and you get to move up progress tracks. Do you hate Euro games? Also great. I think this game might be for you. It actually might be too colorful and a little too thematic to be called a Euro game. So, welcome to my channel. My name's Chance, and today I'm going to be reviewing Endeavor Deep Sea. This game was designed by Carl Davisier and Jarrett Gray, art by Fahid Al-Rajil, and published by Burnt Island Games and Grand Gamers Guild. Let's start with a quick overview of this game so we can get into what I think is good and bad about this game. In Endeavor Deep Sea, 1 to 4 players, and if you have the deluxe edition, it'll be 1 to 5 players, will be competing to have the most beneficial impact on the world's oceans. Players will be taking actions to move their subs around this board, and they will be doing sonar actions to reveal new ocean tiles. Then they will be diving in certain locations to mostly gather research points. Then those research points will be used to carry out conservation actions and publish journal articles. Actions in this game are primarily done by activating your crew members. Everyone starts with a team leader, and the team leader is going to be unique because that person can carry out any action in the game. But every round of the game, players are going to gain one new crew member. And these crew members are going to be specialists. So they're going to have a limited number of actions available to, or a limited set of actions available to them. Which means players are going to have to determine which actions they think are going to be most valuable to their strategy during the course of the game. After 6 rounds are done, players are going to tally up their victory points, and whoever has the most had the most did the most conservation in the ocean. Okay, so that was a pretty short overview. So let's just get into what is good about this game. And I want to touch on kind of what I was calling out in the intro and the fact that this is a Euro game. First up, the theme and the art in this game is unlike most other Euro games I've played. I would compare it kind of to Lost Ruins of Arnak. So Arnak is also another Euro game with a just a fantastic set of art and fantastic set of components. Now I'll kind of come back to another comparison between this and Arnak again, but for now I just want to call out that this game does it again. It takes Euro and says, I'm not going to do beige. I'm going to add some color. I'm going to add some cool submarine meeples, and we're going to make some beautiful art for these ocean tiles. So if I just look through some of these, like this top ocean tile, I got a diving reef. And then next up, there's one with a sunken ship on it. And then I have a jellyfish bloom. And then finally, getting down in the deep, this is a brine pool. So I absolutely love just being able to use that sonar action so I can look at these new tiles. Every time you use sonar, you get to choose 2 tiles of a certain depth to look at, and you get to choose which one goes down. Now, while that tile definitely it has some bonuses on there for the tile you choose, so that will probably play a role in your choice. Sometimes I just look at it and I'm like, ooh, that's really cool. I want to do this one, so I'm going to place it down. While that might not be the best strategy for winning the game, it just is one of this is one of those games that just makes me want to have fun with the systems, and I would say I care less about the actual victory points in the game. Next up, I want to talk about how a lot of Euro games are kind of about struggle, right? They are really they're going to be very crunchy and they're forcing players to think really hard about their actions. They, you get into this situation where you're like, oh, I need this resource to do that, and I need to make sure I have this number of resources to do this action. And then you get to a certain point in the game and you're like, oh, I'm short 1 resource to do the exact thing I need to do. And it all comes down like, could I have planned better? I don't know. And now I will admit, this is going for some people. This is a lot of fun. I enjoyed it sometimes. Like I enjoy those super crunchy euros. They can be really rewarding if you manage to pull off your strategy. But sometimes it's just a little too much, and some people really just don't want to have to struggle that much in a game. Now, Endeavor Deep Sea, I would say, kind of flips this on its head. Whereas a lot of Euros, I would say, are kind of 80% struggle and 20% fun. This one says, what if we made it 80% fun and 20% struggle? So it still has that core struggle in the game. Like there's this action efficiency puzzle. You have to manage the resource of your research points to be able to carry out the primary actions in the game, which are like the conservation and publishing the journals. So there is this efficiency puzzle that players are going to have to work with, and it does have a bit of that crunch to it that a Euro has. But at the same time, it feels a little looser. It feels a little freer. There's a lot of action space on the board, and then everything you do is just kind of giving you things. Like you move your sub to a new location, and the game's like, oh great, move up one of these tracks on your player board. You reveal a new tile and put it on the board. Game's like, oh great, here, move up maybe a couple tracks on the player board. Maybe add an impact token to kind of the scenario board, which is going to be big for scoring at the end of the game. It says, "Oh, you did a conservation action. Cool. Get a impact marker. Maybe move up a track. Did someone else publish a journal? Oh, hey, you can move up a track anyways." So this game is really it's just constantly kind of throwing things at you, and you constantly feel like you're advancing. So a lot of Euro games, I feel like you're kind of stuck in a few turns where you're just kind of prepping to do something really good, whereas this game is always giving you something on every turn you take and even on other players' turns. And we'll get back to kind of some of that friendly interaction later. But the other thing is that there's this mechanism in the game where every round, every player is going to gain a new crew member. And this is probably one of my favorite things about the game is the fact that I don't have to work to kind of get my crew. I don't have to work to get this extra action space. The game just says we're going to make everyone progress. Every time there's a new round, everyone's going to be a little bit more powerful. They're going to have a few more actions available to them. So at the start of the round, everyone will draft from this cool little crew tray and take a new person that will generally unlock a new action space for them. Now, the way they manage to make players have certain benefits for these crew members is this top track here. This top track determines essentially what level crew member you're able to recruit. So someone that focuses on going heavy on that top track, they'll be able to recruit more advanced specialists in the game. So there's still a choice around what strategy you're going to go after, but everyone is kind of being given this thing that they just don't have to work for and they get to have a little more fun and enjoyment in the game. Now, this brings me to the next thing that I think is really good in this game, and that is the progression. So I've talked about being given these crew members and just having that sense of becoming more and more efficient and more powerful and having more actions throughout the game. And this game does a great job of just making, just having that from round one to round six, making you just feel like you've progressed through the game and you become better at the game. I actually think round one is a great intro to the game. It's like well, round one has a good number of choices for a player to do. Most players are only going to be doing about two actions, which kind of eases you into the experience of Endeavor Deep Sea. So that makes it easy to introduce. But then after 6 rounds, you're going to be doing so many actions. You're going to be feeling so good at this game by the end of round six that it really just has this great sense of progression. And then, of course, I can't talk about progression without talking about these tracks. So these tracks players are going to be able to choose kind of how efficient they want to be in certain areas. So like I mentioned, that top track is going to determine the level of crew member you get to recruit. The second track here is going to determine how many action discs you get for the game. And those action discs are critical because you're going to need them to, one, activate your crew members for the actions, but some actions are going to require you to put those discs out on the ocean tiles. And that'll be essentially claiming a spot on the board. Next up is going to be your coordination track, and that track allows you to, at the beginning of the round, remove discs from your crew members. So every round, your crew members that you put disc on, they essentially become, let's say, exhausted or they're busy with that task you gave them. This coordination one says this will allow you to free up that crew member to take on a new action, to take on a new task that you give them in that round. And then the last one is the ingenuity. So that's going to be the level of your kind of submarine that determines how many subs you have on the board, how far your subs can move, and also how deep those subs can dive. So there's a lot of control for a player and a lot of choice in these very simple mechanisms of the game. And I really enjoy that someone could try to go early in the early game, just go after those advanced crew members. But this is probably going to slow down their number of actions because they might not have as many action disc or as much coordination as another person, so they can't kind of free up their crew members to take more actions during the round. So that'll kind of make a player feel a bit slower, but they're going to have these super powerful crew members late in the game. That gives a just a couple different paths for people to pursue. And I really enjoy this. So there's this sense of progression with the gaining the new crew members. There's this sense of progression with how you choose to move those tracks. And the game is constantly allowing you to progress. It's not kind of limiting your progression during the game. It's just everyone is going to be moving up and becoming more powerful during the game. So next good thing that I want to mention is that player interaction. So I touched on this a little bit. And in Euros, there's always that racing aspect. There's going to be players that are essentially, you're trying to get to certain locations before other players. In other Euros, I would say this can be, this might be one of the reasons players hate it, is when someone kind of uh, snipes out the resource or the thing that another player was trying to do before they were able to get there, and that kind of ruins a player's strategy, and they have to really think on their feet and shift strategies significantly during the game. That definitely exists in Endeavor Deep Sea. Like, there's going to be some competition for spaces, especially I would say like those journal publishing spaces, which feel a little more restricted or a little more limited in the game. But overall, I would say there is a lot of ways to get new tiles out, and there's usually a lot of action spaces on these tiles. So even at a 5-player game, which I've played before, I never really felt restricted in what I could do. Sometimes I would be in that spot where it's like, oh, my sub's not in the right spot to do the action that I really want to do, so I got to figure out how to move it to be able to do the action I want while having the resources that I need. So like I said, there's still that crunch in this game, and there is that kind of a bit of that racing aspect that you get in Euro games. But this leads me to the positive player interaction. In Endeavor Deep Sea, they've almost managed to add a bit of a co-op element to this. So a lot of spaces on the board are going to have this thing called a link. So it's mostly on the conservation spaces, and a link is just this line that is between two of these spaces where people put their disc, and it's going to have a benefit printed on that line. And what happens is once the both ends of that link are complete, both players on that end of the link are going to gain that benefit. And what's neat is that if one player completes both ends of the benefit or the link, they still only get that benefit once. So it really wants you to basically partner up with another player so everyone's getting these resources. That means that when some of these tiles come out on the board, like a heavy conservation tile, like maybe you pull the tile with the turtles on it, and it has like 8 conservation spaces on it, you're not going to be just wanting to be there alone and just kind of gobbling up all those conservation spaces. It's usually going to be that maybe 2 or 3 players will move in there, and you will be assisting each other on completing this conservation spaces, and you want to be on those spots so when those links are completed, you're getting extra benefits on someone else's turn. So it creates this almost friendly environment. Instead of feeling like you're being kind of, those spaces are being sniped from you, there is of course some of that, but in a lot of cases you're just like, I hope someone comes here with me so I can basically gain resources not on my turn. And it's just such a great feeling. Like, we some of my games we've had the joking, like that turtle space shows up and it's like, yeah, we're conserving turtles together, high five. Like, it really brings out the theme a bit more, that you're actually trying to do something good instead of just being this negative thing. Like, a lot of Euro games are like, ooh, being a trader in the Mediterranean, or trying to mine something out of a mountain or get oil or something, and it's kind of a little bit darker, and you don't really want to engage with that theme. But this one, it's like doing conservation programs for turtles is great. So everyone at the table tends to have more of a feel good moment. And you're not really stealing things from players. You're helping them out because you're giving them resources by being on similar spaces as they are. So it really creates a friendly environment and a more joyful atmosphere for a Euro game than I've experienced before. Next, I want to talk about the ease of kind of tabling, teaching, and playing. So I mentioned the theme. This is ocean conservation. This is an easier theme to table than a lot of other Euro games I play. Like, it's not, you're not trying to process oil. You're not trying to trade wheat and bricks or whatever in the Mediterranean. You are doing conservation programs in the ocean. This just connects with more people. It is more interesting to people to get to the table. Like when I show them this and I tell them like this is what the game's about, people are like, oh yeah, let's play that. And then also the game is easy to teach. Like, the rule book is really well written. I didn't have much trouble with just reading through it and understanding the flow of the game. I will say that there are going to be some kind of things that you might have to look up during the game. Like this is not one of those games where I was just able to put the rule book away. On my first game, I did have to reference a couple things, but not anything major, I would say. Then, as for play, the play is actually relatively quick. Like the actions are pretty simple. There's nothing overly complicated. Everything ties in really nicely. So once I teach the game, I feel like things get going pretty quickly. And like I said, that round one, everyone's going to have like those two actions. And that really eases players into the game system that's in Endeavor. And the other thing is just that I kind of am touching on this, but it's really just it feels cozy, it feels streamlined, and it just feels fun. The last good thing I want to talk about here is the scenarios. So the game comes with five of these scenario boards, and they are double-sided, which means that you are given a total of 10 scenarios in the box of Endeavor Deep Sea. Now, these scenarios have this impact board where players are going to be placing their disc and gaining various benefits. So far, I've seen like it doesn't feel all that consequential on the impact board. It's a bit of a race to get your disc out there, but I haven't noticed anything amazing about the impact board. The real benefit of these scenarios is that they're going to change your starting game setup. So they'll change what tiles you start the game with. On the table here in front of me, I have basically an end game state where I've explored all the tiles, which will probably only happen in like a four, maybe or very likely a five-player game if you have the deluxe edition. But most of the time, you're not going to fill out this entire board if you're playing at like one, two, or three players. So changing the starting conditions can really kind of change your strategy. The other thing is the scenario goals. So these scenario goals are going to be the one of the big end game scoring objectives for the game, and it really changes how the game plays because it might say something like on this one it says search near the shallows. So you're going to get a point per sonar disc or vessel in columns A and B. So that's going to be your left two columns. It's going to say have do the most sonar actions and have the most submersibles in those two columns. That means you're adding kind of this light area control element to this. It's just so it's forcing a bit more competition in certain areas, which I think is really cool. It's adding this neat strategy, forcing you to kind of compete with players a little bit more. So even though it has this kind of fun, joyful, lighthearted environment, there is still a little bit of that competition where what other players are doing actually matters to you, especially because there's also that friendly interaction. So you definitely are concerned with what other players are doing. So I really like that the game comes with that variability, and also the ocean tiles. There's a decent number of them. I will say after you play the game maybe three or four times, you'll probably have seen all of them. But they're going to come out in different orders, and they're going to be in different configurations. So that really adds a lot of variability just to the actual game board that you're going to end up with. So now let's actually transition to what I think is the bad about this game. First up, I just have to mention it. It's the this is kind of more of a player issue, not a game issue. Well, I guess it depends on who you talk to, but I would say analysis paralysis can be a problem in this game. So it is still a Euro, it still has some of that crunchiness, and there are just going to be some players that are going to kind of freeze with indecision. So, especially in the late game. In the late game, you might have three of your little submersibles out, and you can only move one of them at a time. So some people will feel kind of the criticality of their decisions. They'll say, oh, if I don't move this sub in the right spot, I might only be set up for one action instead of my next three actions. So if I don't choose right this time, like it could kind of hurt me in a future turn. I would say I land in the camp where I'm just like looking at the next thing that's fun to do. I'm just like, ooh, I'm gonna move my sub over there, and I'm gonna do some conservation there. Or like, oh, a sonar spot showed up where I can discover a 5 level deep tile. I'm gonna go and do that. So, so I tend to just have a little more fun with the game. But there are going to be players that are really going to kind of struggle with the analysis. They're going to be worried about those victory points, and they're going to try to I would say math out their actions a little more than other players. And this can really kind of drag the game down a bit. So a game that is fun and lighthearted, if you just run into a person that you just have to sit there for a couple minutes while they think about their turn, just like any other game, that's really going to kind of slow the flow down and take you out of the moment. Um, so I just want to call that out as a problem because it is a Euro game, so there is potential for that analysis paralysis. Now, the bigger problem I have with the game is the unequal turn structure. So every round, players are going to get a number of action discs, and they're going to have that coordination that's going to allow them to remove a certain number of action discs from their crew members. And this means that players don't actually take an equal number of turns during the round. It depends on how efficient they've been during the last round, basically. Depends on what tracks they've decided to go up. So I mentioned earlier that someone that's going heavy on getting the highly advanced crew members might be a little bit slower in the early game just because they're not going to have as many action discs, they're not going to have as much coordination, so they're not going to be able to remove those action discs from their crew members. Which means that while someone else might be taking 4 or 5 actions around, they might be stuck taking 2 again, maybe 3. And this is going to mean that if you're playing a 4 player game, you could have one player that's done after 2 actions and everyone else has taken 3 or 4 actions, which means they're going to just have more downtime during the game. And this is something that I kind of hate about entry level games. When I introduce a game to a new player, I like games that have equal turn structures. That way, the player never feels like they're doing something wrong or they're out of the game. When you have this unequal structure and you're introducing it to a player and they're the ones that kind of fell behind and just they're not taking as many turns, there can be a bit of this failure, this feeling that they're not doing something right, that they've failed at the game, and or they just aren't going to be having fun because they're just sitting there and watching other people do fun things. So I would say this is definitely a bit of an issue. With new players, I do try to call out, I try to be very specific on those action efficiency things. I try to be like, yeah, you can go for those high level crew members. That is a really fun strategy to do, but just realize that you might not be taking as many turns as other players in the game. Or just mention that like, hey, the coordination track, it doesn't seem super important right now, but once you have 3 or 4 crew members, it's going to be super important for you to clear off those action spaces because you are very limited on the action space that you can get. So I think the teach can help out with this unequal turn thing, but it is one of those things that I think you should be aware of, especially when introducing this new players. I do have a few nitpicks on the production. So these ones aren't anything that I think are showstoppers, but I want to call them out because they are some kind of production annoyances, I would say. One of them is the scenario board. So I mentioned that there's these goals printed on the scenario board. The problem is that once impact discs start coming out on this board, you are never able to move this board again. And that is a bit of a problem because these goals are not very large print. They are not easy to read. The players are going to need to reference them a lot. So what ends up happening is that one of the players that's close to this board is just going to be reading these off like every round. They're going to be reminding players, oh, this first goal is for submersibles in the 2 left columns. So it's definitely an annoyance that this is printed right on the board where you're going to be placing these wooden discs, and this is basically impossible for anyone but the 2 closest players to it to read. Next one is the journals are a bit boring. So these are the journal cards, and as you can see, they I guess they had to have a beige component because of this being a Euro. They're like, well, we need to have something beige in here. So these journal cards are relatively lifeless. I would say I understand why they did this because there is a lot to look at across the game. Um, so these journal cards are very functional. They're very clean. They're very easy to parse, even across the table. Like most people will be able to kind of look at them and be like, oh, okay, that's what that one does. Icons are a little small, but overall they're just very functional cards. But they just have no art on them. The only thing giving you some flavor is going to be the title of the journal you just published. So like one here is Understanding Life in the Deep Sea, or we have Benefits of Inter-Team Data Sharing. So not exactly the most throwing things, but I also understand that, research articles are not supposed to be the most exciting things for people to read. So this kind of adds to the theme. It's just one of those things where it's like, oh, this board looks so beautiful, but then you have these kind of super boring beige cards on the table. Next up is and while I'm talking about the journal cards and how they're functional, I'm just going to say icons. There are a lot of icons on the board. None of them are very hard. All of them are very, I would say, straightforward to understand, but they didn't actually provide any player reference for you, which I would say kind of is definitely a downside. Now, the good thing is that a lot of the stuff is so like the icon to move up your tracks is very clearly printed and color coded to match up to the tracks on your player board. So those are pretty easy to parse. And there's not really that many icons, so I'd say after about round two in the game, there's very rarely questions on what an icon is. There are some downsides on like the journal cards and the dive tokens that'll have kind of special icons, and there's a little reference in the rule book. And I'll admit that that's probably the thing I reference most. And I wish there was a player aid talking about some of these kind of special actions a little bit more. Then the other thing, talking about referencing rules, are the special tiles. So there are going to be a decent number of special tiles with their own little kind of rules quirks in the games, and there is a nice one-page reference for these special tiles, which is super convenient. But it is kind of a downside where people pull out these tiles and it's like, oh, what's this tile? And you gotta pull out this reference sheet and be like, oh, these are the special rules for that one. And every time someone's going to move, you may have to reference that sheet. They'll be like, "Oh, what's this tile do again?" or "What's that tile do again?" And they're trying to figure out if they can take advantage of that special tile rules. So that's just a something that slows down the game a little bit. As I mentioned, you'll probably see all the tiles after about 3 or 4 games, and you will have a pretty good understanding of the iconography and what the special tiles do. So not a huge issue, just kind of a nitpick that I have. So this leads me to my final thoughts on Endeavor Deep Sea. Overall, I love this game. It's fantastic. I find it fun. I find it just kind of joyful to play. I find it easy to introduce new players, and new players kind of connect with the theme a bit more. I don't have a lot of games that are going to be so I would say what I would say is a crowd pleaser. Most people are on board with ocean conservation, so everyone that I bring this out to is kind of excited to see this game and to experience it. As I mentioned, this it still has that crunchiness in a Euro game. So this has, while I enjoy showing this to new players because I feel like it's an easy introduction to kind of the Euro game genre, there's still enough of a decision space for a hobby board gamer to engage with these systems. So it fills this nice gap between like that heavy Euro and the light, meaningless games that you might be playing. Um, like I said, the only real downside with new players is the fact that there's the unequal turns. I feel like in my game so far, it hasn't been a huge issue because players have been kind of they're just having a good time with this game. So like while there's been downtime in my games, like I'm usually joking with someone, I hear conversations across the table, we're talking about some of the art and we're joking about doing or sharing conservation with the turtles. So overall, this game just I've always had a good experience with this game. So I definitely recommend this game. I think this is a fantastic production, a fantastic Euro. This one will be staying in my collection because it fills kind of this gap in my collection between a lighter game and these heavy, crunchy Euros. So I'm going to be keeping this one around for a while, at least until I complete all those scenarios and I get to have a bunch more experiences with it. So with that being said, I want to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'm just starting out my YouTube channel, so those types of things really help me out. And let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you've had similar experiences with this game and if you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And if you haven't, I would like to know why. What didn't you enjoy about this game? So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.